Sign it or get out of this family. My dad screamed at me, his face red, his hands shaking so hard that hot coffee sloshed over the edge of the mug. And before I could even process what was happening, he threw it straight at my chest. I still remember the split second of silence before the pain hit me. It felt like my skin was on fire. I stumbled backward, clutching myself, while my mom just stood there, frozen. All of this, over a piece of paper I refused to sign. So tell me, was I wrong for standing my ground? Would you have signed it just to keep the peace? Even if it meant losing everything that was rightfully yours? To understand how it got that bad, I need to go back a few years. I'm the youngest of 3. My older brother, Jason, has always been the golden child. Straight A's, varsity athlete, dad's pride and joy. My sister, Emily, kept her head down and stayed out of trouble. And then there was me. I wasn't a screw-up, but I wasn't Jason either. I liked art, I liked writing. I didn't want to take over my dad's construction business like he always planned. And that alone made me the disappointment. My dad built his company from nothing. He used to tell us stories about sleeping in his truck when he was younger, about taking every job he could get. I respected that. I really did. But respect wasn't enough for him. He wanted obedience. He wanted loyalty in the form of control. And as we got older, that control turned into expectations carved in stone. When my grandma passed away 3 years ago, everything changed. She left behind a decent inheritance. Not millions, but enough to matter. The will stated that her house and savings would be split equally among her 3 grandchildren. That meant Jason, Emily, and me. My dad was furious when he found out, not because we got something, but because he didn't control it. He had always assumed that whatever Grandma left would somehow funnel back into his business. At first, he played it cool. He sat us down at the kitchen table and said it would be smart to pool our inheritance and invest it into expanding the company. Family business stays in the family, he said. Jason agreed immediately. Of course he did. He was already working with Dad. Emily hesitated but eventually nodded. Then it was my turn. I said I needed time to think. That was the first crack. I didn't want to invest my share. I had dreams. I wanted to move to the city and enroll in a design program. I wanted independence. My grandma used to tell me, "Don't let anyone decide your life for you." Those words echoed in my head every time. Dad brought it up. For months, he kept pressuring me. At dinner, in passing comments, even during family gatherings. Still being selfish? He'd joke, but his eyes weren't joking. Mom would give me that look, the one that said, "Just give in. It's easier." But I couldn't. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about my future. Then one night, Dad called a family meeting. The atmosphere felt wrong the moment. I walked into the living room. Papers were laid out on the coffee table. A pen sat on top. Jason stood behind Dad like backup. Emily avoided eye contact. Dad slid the document toward me. It was a legal agreement, transferring my inheritance into the business, permanently. "I've already talked to a lawyer," he said. "This protects the company. Protects the family." I felt my stomach drop. "It protects you," I said quietly. That's when his jaw tightened. "Everything I do is for this family." "Then why does it feel like I don't get a choice?" I asked. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and said the words that still echo in my head. "Because sometimes being part of a family means sacrifice." "I've sacrificed enough," I said. "I'm not signing." The room went silent. Jason scoffed. "You're being dramatic," Emily whispered. "Maybe just think about it a little longer." But I had thought about it. For months. I stood up, ready to leave the room, and that's when Dad grabbed his mug. He took a step toward me, yelling, "Sign it, or get out of this family." I turned back, heart pounding. If that's the price, then maybe I will. And then the coffee flew. The pain was instant and blinding. I screamed. Mom rushed forward with a towel. Dad just stood there, breathing heavily, like he couldn't believe what he'd done. Jason muttered, "You pushed him." Like somehow this was my fault. I ended up in the emergency room with second-degree burns across my chest and collarbone. The nurse asked how it happened. I lied. I said it was an accident. I don't know why. Maybe I was still protecting them. Maybe I wasn't ready to accept that my own father had assaulted me over money. After that night, something inside me broke. I moved out 2 weeks later. I used part of my inheritance to get a small apartment and enroll in that design program I'd always wanted. Dad didn't call. Mom sent a few texts asking if I was ready to apologize. Apologize. For not signing away my future. Months went by. I built a new life. It wasn't easy. I worked part-time, studied late, stretched every dollar. But I felt free, and for the first time, I felt proud of myself. Then, almost a year later, I got a call from Emily. She was crying. The business was failing. Apparently, Dad had overextended himself. He'd taken loans assuming the expansion would skyrocket profits. It didn't. Clients pulled out. Costs piled up. Jason had put all of his inheritance into it, just like Dad wanted. And now most of it was gone. Emily had invested too, though less. She was terrified she'd lose her savings. And suddenly Dad wanted to talk to me. He showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked older, tired, but not remorseful. "We need help," he said bluntly. "You still have your share." I stared at him. "You threw coffee at me." "You provoked me," he snapped automatically, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "Look, that's in the past. In the past. The scars on my chest said otherwise. He asked me to invest now, to save the company. Promised this time I'd have a say. Promised he'd treat me like a partner. And this is where I need you to think about what you would have done. Because I was standing there, face to face with the man who burned me, who told me I wasn't family unless I obeyed him. But he was still my dad. Jason and Emily were still my siblings. If I walked away, the business might collapse. Jobs would be lost. My family could lose everything. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what I did, I want you to pause for a second and imagine yourself there. Would you have helped? Would you have given him another chance? Comment below what you would have done in my shoes. I didn't answer him right away. I asked for the financial records. I told him if I was even going to consider it, I needed transparency. He looked annoyed but agreed. Over the next week, I combed through everything. The numbers were worse than Emily described. Debt stacked on debt, risky decisions. It wasn't bad luck, it was ego. When we met again, I laid it all out. "You didn't just make mistakes," I said. "You ignored advice. You gambled," he bristled. "I built this from nothing. And you might destroy it the same way," I replied. For the first time in my life, he didn't yell. He just looked defeated. I told him I wouldn't give him money. Not as a handout. Not as a blind investment. But I would offer something else. I had been building connections in the design world. Small businesses, startups, marketing teams. I proposed rebranding the company, cutting unnecessary expenses, restructuring leadership. And if I got involved, it would be as an equal partner. Contracts signed, boundaries set, and mandatory anger management for him. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're blackmailing me." "No," I said calmly. "I'm protecting myself." There was a long silence. Finally, he nodded. It wasn't enthusiastic. It wasn't proud, but it was a nod. The next few months were brutal. We fought constantly, but this time in boardrooms, not living rooms. I brought in consultants. We downsized. We rebranded. Slowly, painfully, the company stabilized. Not because of Dad's old-school stubbornness, but because we adapted. Our relationship, it's complicated. He's never fully apologized for the coffee. He once said awkwardly, "I shouldn't have reacted like that." That's as close as I'll probably get. Jason resented me at first, said I was taking over. But when his paycheck started coming in steady again, he softened. Emily thanked me more times than I can count. And me, I kept my apartment. I kept my independence. I negotiated a role that allows me to balance both my design career and the business. I didn't give up my dreams. I expanded them. Looking back, I don't think the real fight was about money. It was about control. My dad thought family meant obedience. I learned that family should mean respect. If I had signed that paper years ago, I would have lost more than my inheritance. I would have lost myself. So was I wrong? I don't think so. Standing up to him cost me a lot. It left scars, physical and emotional. But it also forced a change that might have saved all of us. If you were on my side, like this video, if you think I should have just signed and kept the peace, tell me why in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about family drama, tough choices and real consequences, make sure you subscribe for more. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess below. I read as many comments as I can. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next story.